Well, welcome everyone. First night of our fall Buddhist studies class. And we're gathered to study this fourth foundation of mindfulness, really one of the essential teachings in the early Buddhist collection of teachings, all pointing to here and now. And it's a real turning in a way. Those who have been doing the Buddhist studies recently, in the winter we studied mindfulness of the body, the first of the four foundations, then mindfulness of feeling tone in the spring. Those of you who were here in the summer, we did mindfulness of mind. And this fourth foundation usually is left untranslated. So it's mindfulness of Dhammas. And Dhammas is one of those words, same as Dharma. The Pali equivalent is Dhamma, and the Sanskrit is Dharma, two related languages. Pali is the language spoken around the time of the Buddha, and so it's the language that the early Buddhist teachings were recorded in when they were eventually written down a couple centuries after the time of the Buddha. And so mindfulness of Dhammas, mindfulness of Dharmas, it's really pointing to, like, a lot of what we did early in the year is like learning how to be aware of the body, like how to, almost like we're purifying our view of the body. And then in the spring, purifying how the mind understands so that it can connect with feeling tone, the pleasantness or unpleasantness or neutrality of any moment of experience. Same thing with the mind. Now, it's not a complete turning, but instead of, it's almost like with the fourth foundation, now we're responsible. We're sort of presuming that I'm no longer helpless. I can connect with reality, the present moment. And so now the teachings are about, well, given that we know how to connect with things as they are, which ways of connecting, when I pay attention to what and what kind of way, does the heart move in the direction of release? When I pay attention in another way, does my heart, my mind get all entangled? So it's much more about understanding, like being mindful of the skillful way to be relating. Not so much how to connect with the body or feeling tone or the mind, but how to be skillful and how to abandon being unskillful when we know these objects. So really, if you wanted to, if there was a test question, what is the object of meditation when we're doing the fourth foundation practices? The object, like what the mind is knowing or discerning, is the skillfulness, like, oh yeah, this is a hindrance, it should be abandoned. Or these are wholesome, beneficial qualities of mind, they should be stabilized, they should be balanced, they should be developed. So mostly what we'll be doing this fall is we'll be using the list of the hindrances, what hinders the continuity of present moment awareness, and using the list of the 7 awakening factors, which is, it's like one of the really powerful lists. Just knowing about the 7 awakening factors, just being able to recognize those qualities, it has a sort of a deep psychological, spiritual benefit. And I think I've mentioned recently, I don't know if people heard this, but at the time of the Buddha, when people were really sick, someone would send, a monk, a nun, one of the elders, to either give a talk or just to chant the teachings on the 7 factors of awakening. And it was, I don't know, people had confidence that it had curative effects, just to be reminded. And we'll do this during the guided meditation tonight. And for those, I'm sure there are some in the group that have not been part of the Buddhist studies before, but I was just kind of going through my notes, and we started way back, I think in 2000, so 21 years now. It's about a 5 or 6 year cycle through all the different courses, and then it just starts again. So this is maybe the beginning of the fourth cycle through these maps. And the way to think about these different teachings in early Buddhism from the Buddha, Bhikkhu Bodhi has this image of those early days when they were making maps. When they had a plane, they would just shoot a lot of photographs of the land below. They developed the photographs, and then they'd sort of lay them out on a big table. And there were overlapping photographs. Each photograph was, an independent thing, but it was sort of covering the same territory. And then you sort of line them up. And it's the same thing with the different teachings that we learn over the years. It's just mapping out, just different lenses, different cognitive maps. If it's a good map, if it's an effective map, it helps us to see the nature of the mind, the nature of experience. It illuminates that. And the idea of these maps is that there was an awakened being, a really wise person who had teased out, uprooted all the distortions in their mind based on their cultural conditioning. And right, so the Buddha did his practice, teased out the distortion. So then when he attempted to articulate maps out of compassion, trying to make it easier for other people to have the same insight he had, right? His articulation was really in alignment with the nature of the mind, the nature of experience in a deep way. Because he, by definition, somebody with a lot of wisdom has learned how not to be confused by all of the conditioning processes that we inevitably go through as a human being, through culture, just even genetically. And it's not like practice, magically makes our condition go away. It's that we learn to feel and see conditioning, like how the mind is conditioned, like our implicit biases. It's getting a little bit more attention these days because we're paying more attention to things like racism and just these biases, even around gender, around class, around body size. And it's so useful, it'd be nice if we didn't have these biases. I'm not sure that's really possible. But what is possible is to start to recognize the biases that are there. And there's real freedom because we sense the bias, we sense the tendency. When someone does this, I get really defensive, but I can be aware of that pattern. I can be willing to feel what it feels like for defensiveness to get triggered. And it doesn't have to distort my behavior. It doesn't have to drive what I say, how I think, what I do. Because I have this option, not repression. I'm not repressing that conditioned tendency, but I'm seeing it for what it is. So what makes the Buddhist studies class really powerful, I know it's a little strange having most of you. We have about 105 people online right now, and some people will watch it probably on our YouTube channel. And Kevin, would you turn the lights up a little brighter? Yeah, thanks. So it's a little strange using our hybrid format, but the idea is for these 8 weeks, we want to make a commitment to doing our practice and doing some study, and make a commitment to coming together on Monday night, including every other week having a small group, whether you're online or whether you're here in the room. It's just part of the Buddhist studies, and you don't have to like it. but this is what we're committing to together. And in the early years, when we had a nice group of 40 people, we noticed when someone wasn't there. Now with a lot of people online and some of you in the room, it'd be very easy to be anonymous. But we want to sort of at the beginning really consciously make a commitment to showing up. Now, some of you will have business obligations that won't make sense to get, to change, or you might have family obligations, a sick child or something like that. And it's totally okay to miss a class, but it's not okay not to come online or in person because you don't want to come, right? So if you sign up, you come if you can come, but if there's a real excuse, you don't need to be embarrassed about missing it. That's why we record it. All the programs will be on our YouTube channel. And also it takes a little longer, but they should also be up on dharmaseed.org. So you can just listen to the audio there. So please take in that commitment, and also let's really be supported by each other's commitment. So, at a minimum, 1 day a week, you're doing some study. So you're using some of the articles that I'm sending out or the recordings that I'm sending out, and you're using that to inform your sitting practice and your walking practice and your daily life practice, right? And you're putting in some time on your meditation chair or cushion. We like to think people are doing it every day, but at least there's the aspiration to put in time every day. I'm not, I know that some of your lives maybe aren't conducive to sitting every day. But it's really important because the insight, the real value of the practice, it really benefits. I mean, some of your lives may be settled enough that your whole day can be a meditation, but that's pretty rare. Mostly we're getting pushed around by all these forces, and the mind ends up being pretty superficial and distracted a lot of the day. Now, we can learn a lot in daily life practice, but there's something about the body being still, being in a quiet space, a conducive space that makes us feel safe enough, where it's, if nothing else, it's demonstrating to ourselves, I really care about using my mind to know the mind. How do I know I care? Because I've set aside these 30 minutes to do this work. And it really stands out. So we're going to begin now by chanting the Three Refuges. It's a pretty simple chant. I hear people in the room, it was a small piece of paper. Most of you know it. Those of you who are online, you can find it in the document that we have been pasting there for you in the chat. And we sing it a little bit slower than we would if we were doing the traditional chant, just as an opportunity to hear our voices come together. Of course, in this setting, hopefully you'll hear the people in the room chanting. And I'll ring the bell 3 times. For those who are unfamiliar with the Three Refuges, since the time of the Buddha and all the places in the world where these teachings have gone, there's been this traditional recitation of taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And in this context, Buddha means, that's actually what the word means, to be awake. So we're taking refuge not so much in somebody who lived a long time ago, because that person can't really do our practice for us, can't really help us in that sense. What we're taking refuge in is what the Buddha came to understand, we can come to understand. What the Buddha woke up to, we can wake up to. We're taking refuge in that, in wakefulness. And what does the Buddha wake up to? Dhamma, the way it is. So this marriage of Buddha and Dhamma is just shorthand for our practice, for our deepest value. So whatever we do in life, whether we're raising kids or passionate about this or that, or whatever we do, this is what the reason we do this chant and we remember the Three Refuges is we want to find ways to make this the number one priority. And everything else we're going to do in life isn't going to be bothered by valuing Buddha, knowing Dhamma, waking up to the way it is. Now, when we're really deluded, we think we're already awake to the way it is. That's a sign of delusion, you know. We think, oh no, I know what's what. And the more we wake up, the more there's a lot of humility. Like, I know that I don't know. Like, that's a sign we've become a good practitioner. I know that I don't know. I know I'm mostly deluded. I'm mostly lost in my thoughts about stuff. And those thoughts, when I pay attention, don't really line up with reality. They're like bubbles of meaning the cognitive mind has constructed. Seems to have a lot of coherence when I'm lost in thought, but when I have any kind of space of wisdom, there's a very clear recognition that's just a thought, and not even a very useful thought. It's like a dream, and then we wake up and we realize, oh, that was just a dream. But the dream had a lot of coherence when we were in the middle of it, attached, identified. But as soon as it's seen as a dream, it's like, you know, it's just that. So we take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and then Sangha is this flowering of our engagement. So we sometimes use that word Sangha to talk about spiritual community, but in a more technical way, Sangha, we take refuge in enlightened or awakened activity. And in a real sense, there isn't an awakened being, there's moments of awakened, beautiful, loving, nimble, creative, skillful activity. And we see it sometimes in others, and we see it sometimes in ourselves. And it's the natural expression of Buddha knowing Dhamma. When we're really intimate, really awake, feeling, seeing, being with the way it is, then our activity, whether we're sitting on a couch or marching down the street, our activity reflects, is an expression of that intimacy of Buddha knowing Dhamma. It just shines with creativity and functionality. In the same way, when I'm caught up with my fixed views, my activity tends to be pretty clunky in the world. Have you noticed? You know, like when we're really holding on to our opinion about what's what, it's like, it's not easy to get through the day and to have a conversation. So we'll do the chant together, then we'll sit for a while. I'll talk a little bit, and we'll end the evening with small groups tonight. I thought it might be useful right at the start to do small groups. And I'll just mention the theme for the small groups tonight, because it really, this discussion theme, I think, really helps illuminate the fourth foundation of mindfulness that we'll be studying. I mentioned this a little earlier, that the point of the fourth foundation, like the Buddha saying, okay, here's another quarter of your practice, and in a way, the real culmination of the practice, where we're putting aside any sense of helplessness. Even if we don't know what to do, like how to sort of act out or use these teachings around the fourth foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of Dhammas, we start with this confidence that there's a way to pay attention that's liberating. And there are ways to pay attention that are entangling and constricting. And through just caring enough, bringing a way of paying attention that has a lot of care and a lot of vigilance, steadfastness, I can learn how to be paying attention to my life in a way that's liberating. This is possible for me. And I like this quote from Ajahn Sumedho, we're liberating ourselves from the suffering, he says, that the suffering that ends is the suffering we create out of ignorance. So whatever our ignorant ways, our fixed views, whatever that burden, that can be put down. We're still human beings. A lot of times people think, well, I don't want, it's like we don't think that suffering matters as much as the fact that I stub my toes and it's cold in the winter and, I can't eat all the sugar I want to eat. But actually the suffering the mind creates out of ignorance really resolves when we have those moments where the mind isn't creating suffering out of ignorance. The sort of mystical or transformative experience is a very profound, it's okay. Life hasn't changed, but there's this profound sense, it's okay, it's been okay, it will be okay. And it's a little earth-shaking, that insight. So I thought in the small groups, just to reflect, each person will have a chance to speak, but just to reflect about, and I'm bringing it up now so you can just, in a natural way, let it percolate in terms of what might make sense for you to share in your small group of 3 or 4 people. But places in your life where you've had that sense of how, paying attention, feeling responsible for the suffering that you're experiencing, feeling responsible enough that you started to pay attention, like to have a more honest, steady, even intimate relationship, like, oh, I'm hurting. I'm tied up into knots. My heart's heavy. I'm totally crazy. Or whatever the experience is, and then the arising of confidence. There's a way, like when I'm suffering, it means I'm not understanding clearly. And that's a real change, because the basic conditioned feeling is when I'm suffering, somebody's messing with me, the world or an individual, and it's not fair, and we externalize the cause of suffering. So this 4th foundation, and the topic for the small group is, where in your life do you remember taking responsibility, like really having that inclination, I don't think this burdened heart has to be this way. I think there's another way for me to be here, showing up in this moment, where this all being burdened and tied up into knots isn't what it is, what it appears to be right now. And there's a flip, there was a burden, and then the mind, because it persisted, it was curious. It wasn't getting in there and but just letting understanding shift. The way the mind is relating shifted, and it made all the difference. And of course, you may not have that kind of experience. It comes to mind. And you can talk about places where you don't have that confidence, like where there's suffering, and you're pretty sure it's because I'm getting old and the body hurts, or this person I have to work with mistreats me, and the suffering that we experience feels very much out of our hand. Because it's good to just acknowledge that. Am I sure? There's nothing I can do. And this is like a provocative thing, because there are difficult people to work with, and Minnesota winters are cold. And I mean, these things are real. Getting old, the body generally hurts more, right? Aches in the morning for sure. And on and on. So there are very real vicissitudes of life, but does that mean we have to suffer because of it? So that's what we'll explore. But let's sit, and we'll do some of that exploration in the sit. We'll start by chanting the Three Refuges. Please join in if you'd like. I'll ring the bell to begin. Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. And we'll settle into our sitting posture for the meditation. And the hub of our practice is this embodied mindfulness, this presence of the whole body, sitting body. So allowing this generous presence with the body, the breathing body, And we use this anchor of embodiment not to push things away, but to allow everything to open up. Everything that needs to be learned, needs to be seen, can be right here with this experience of embodiment, this changing river of sensation, subtle and gross. And the experience of the body is neither beautiful nor ugly. It's just what it is. This movement of sensation, the elements of hardness, softness, heat and coolness, movement and stillness. So we're using this experience of embodiment to learn how to be intimate, how to sustain this balanced, kind attention with something that's ordinary. Nature, the nature of the body. Breathing in, experiencing the whole body, while breathing out, experiencing the whole body. And whatever interrupts that continuity of awareness with embodiment, then that's just another experience being known, whatever it is. And that also can be seen as an ordinary phenomena that comes and goes like everything else. Even if it seems dramatic what's arising, just understand that sometimes it's like this. This experience is being felt, being known. And that includes the arising of any doubt or judgment. Oh, sometimes it's like this. Doubt is being known. Confusion is being known. It feels like this in the body. It might be too much energy or too little, being sleepy. Just see that energy level, whatever it might be, as an experience that's being known. And if there's a reaction, notice the reaction as something being known. So we're really investing in this wisdom awareness, this way of being, this way of relating, that's steadfast and wise and kind, deeply trusting this exposure, this intimacy with what's coming and going. And when nothing is predominant, we train with our anchor, this experience of embodiment, breathing in, intimate with the whole body just as it is, breathing out, allowing the body to be. But when other strong experiences, phenomena arise, then allow the attention to simply know, this is how it is now. Feels like this. And as we have more continuity, then quite naturally wisdom will discern the causes for stress, the causes for constriction, and the causes supporting release and freedom. That learning happens naturally when there's that wise and continuous mindful attention. So we're going to continue in silence for about 10 more minutes. So remember, in a creative way, we're participating in the causes for stress and the causes for release. We're learning how to participate in a way in the process of awakening by how we pay attention and what we're paying attention to. So the most important thing is to feel the sense, this wholesome sense of responsibility. It's compassion, really. How can I be here in this moment in a way that's in the direction of release and freedom and a deeper ease and other beautiful qualities of heart and mind. And for the last minute or two, just curious about what freedom, what ease, what well-being might be available when conditions are like this now. What is the wise way to be present now? What's in the way? Or another way of asking is, how can I really take care of this life now? And take a little time, stretch your body in a way that is helpful for you, so you feel comfortable. So I want to cover two things before we do the small groups for the last 20 minutes. I want to talk about this handout, the Wheel of our Satipatthana practice. This comes from Bhikkhu Analio. This is this wonderful German monk and one of my teachers and just a great practitioner, scholar. We're really fortunate to have him sort of right in the height of his teaching and and writing. So he's written actually 3 books on this teaching, the Satipatthana, the foundations. Somebody else translates it as the establishments of mindfulness: body, feeling tone, mind, and Dhammas. And we're studying this 4th foundation. And this image that is described in this sheet, this handout, can be a really useful way to hold the essence of what the Buddha was saying about mindfulness. So at the hub of the wheel, so he uses the image of a wheel, and the hub you can read here, or if you don't have it open in front of you, that's okay, I'll go through it, but you can take a look at it later. It's kind of spelled out in a simple way. The hub of the wheel is this embodied awareness. So we can always start over here. And it can be supported even with a phrase. There is this body. You can do this during the day. You can do this during your set. You can do this during your walking meditation time. Oh, there is this body. It feels like this. And then another just a technique that can be helpful, and because we're really setting out, many of you have already done this, but if you haven't, we're really setting out to cultivate a friendship with the experience of the body. Oh, my old friend, so that awareness gets in the habit, it knows how to meet and hang out with the present moment embodied experience. It becomes, with practice, not without practice, the default. The awareness just is there again in the body because we've trained it. If we don't train the awareness to be with embodiment, what do you think awareness does? It pays attention to mental proliferation. And in that way, awareness gets pushed around. Every imagining, it's like a dream, and then the awareness, in a sense, is entangled, is affected by all that. But we can cultivate this embodied presence as a kind of training ground. And the training ground are really these 7 spokes. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on mindfulness, the foundations of mindfulness, one of the great things about Venerable Analayo, this German monk, he's quite a scholar. He's one of those amazingly brilliant folks. And so he learned Chinese and he learned Tibetan, and he could look into the, early on in Buddhism, relatively speaking, the teachings went to China, and then a little bit later up into Tibet. And all the teachings went there. So even though these later schools developed other teachings after the time of the Buddha, some well after the time of the Buddha, the original teachings from this person, the Buddha, are embedded in those canons, in the Tibetan canon and the Chinese canon, just like they are in the Pali canon. The common ground is in the early Buddhist tradition, so we use the Pali canon, not the Chinese canon, not the Tibetan canon. And these are sort of where the ancient teachings are held. There's also some older Sanskrit collections of these teachings. And so what Venerable Analayo was able to do is look at the sutta in these 3 different places and see what might have been added on later in one of those 3 places, to try to get a sense, because how humans are, we add on. It's like that game telephone, right? You pass it on long enough and things begin to change. And there's some rigor in these places like Buddhism where people really care, but still there is change. And so with his analysis, these are the 7 practices that all the kind of early collection of this sutta have. And so these are the 7 spokes. So with this hub of embodied mindfulness, in the context of embodied mindfulness, this is what we've been doing this whole year. The contemplation of the body in these 3 ways. We looked at the anatomical parts, which is just a way of uprooting the tendency to think our body is special. And the image here, some of you remember this from the winter course, is that bag of seeds, a burlap bag. There's sesame seeds, and sunflower seeds, and grains of rice, and grains of wheat. So sometimes people think this body part contemplation is like gross. We got the nails of the fingers, and the nails of the toes, and the hair of the head, and the hair of the body, and the skin, and the organs. But it's meant to be, because this is the simile the Buddha uses, like a bag of seeds. It's just stuff. Neither beautiful nor ugly. It's just stuff. And you see how that's a powerful correction, because generally we either think our bodies are special or we think they're disgusting. Rarely do we see bodies as, grass is green and this skin is this color and the hair of your head's like that. We don't see it as just ordinary stuff. We always impute a kind of specialness, special because it's disgusting or special because it's attractive, onto bodies. So, like I said, when we're in this embodied experience, then we can kind of start purifying how the mind relates. Because there are these inevitable distortions that got picked up, like thinking things are special, or thinking things are permanent. So we watched the breath and we paid attention to the impermanent nature of the breath. But we can do that with any sensations or any sound or any sight or any thought. We can observe that it's not permanent, So these four distortions, where we think things are special, or we think things are satisfying, or we think things are permanent, or we think things are, what am I missing here? Permanent, pleasant. I'm forgetting one. Oh, a self. Or we think things are personal, right? So with the body, with feeling tone, we're in this embodied place, we're training the mind, we're paying attention in a way that's a counterweight to our bad habits of thinking things are permanent and personal and special and satisfying. They're not. I mean, there are nice experiences, but they're not satisfying in a lasting way. But it always seems that way. You might be imagining what you're going to do when you get home in a half an hour. And you might be imagining, when I'm doing that, I'm going to be satisfied. But how many times have we done that thing? And it's pleasant, but it doesn't satisfy. And we can learn this. So that's what we've been doing this year. And then, so we have the contemplations on the body, contemplations on feeling tone and the impermanence of feelings, the pleasantness or unpleasantness, contemplation of the mind, which, really helps. Like, there are beautiful mind states, and there are more superficial and distracted and fragmented mind states. But it's basically just the mind being known, just the particular quality of the mind being known. And we can have that sense of the kind of muscle we were developing this summer is to be able to look at the mind as a natural phenomena. How's the mind doing? Oh, it's really tight. Oh, it's really expansive and light. There's a lot of joy. It's heavy with sleepiness. It's confused with restlessness, that kind of bubbly, can't settle down energy. To be able to observe the mind, because that's the necessary step, really, to do the fourth foundation. Because once we can see the mind as nature, then we can start, the question naturally arises, okay, now I've cleared up a lot of the distortions in how I'm present with the body and mind through the first 6 trainings, or the first 5 trainings rather. And then we bring to mind, like, what's hindering, and this is what we start talking about next week, what's hindering the awareness, the depth and sensitivity, and really the purity, like I said, like non-distorted awareness, just seeing things as they are, no spin. Oh, it's like this. It's something being known, something being felt. And then once we've kind of learned how to prevent and abandon any hindrances, then we really perfect the balance. So there's beautiful energizing, joy, beautiful tranquilizing, stillness, tranquility, equanimity, and the mind's really balanced. And nobody does awakening. Awakening happens when the conditions of our mind are there. That mind, that heart sees things as they are. And you can see in this, what's left in the contemplations of the Dhammas is the hindrances in the awakening. And then the process of insight is an inevitable and unstoppable thing. Once the mind has come into balance, can't be stopped. The image the Buddha uses is like the Ganges River flows to the ocean. So when there's that beautiful balance, insight deepens, understanding deepens, the mind lets go. Or as Ajahn Sumedho said that I read earlier, the suffering that ends is the suffering we create out of ignorance. Or as Ajahn Chah said, this is Ajahn Sumedho's teacher, this great Thai master, realizing the heart that's empty of grasping. So this heart-mind, the heart-mind we know is probably almost always, if not always, entangled in a little or big way. We don't really know the mind that has ceased grasping experience or ceased its dependence on sense experience. Like we can start to notice, like one powerful step in our practice is we notice how our awareness is hungry for experience, is dependent on experience, is looking for an interesting experience, is bored with experience, right? So this actually helps us understand the awakening of a Buddha when we see that existential, really, restlessness of consciousness. It's entangled with name and form, is how we say it in Buddhist terms. And it's endlessly uneasy. So Nibbana is described as not that, no more that restlessness. That's actually what the word Nibbana means, that ceases. It's the extinction or the going out of that restlessness, the mind, the knowing mind's entanglement with sense experience. I mean, we do know when our mind has a lot of contentment, right? Just like we know when our mind has no contentment. It's all really discontent. So we kind of get a sense of that direction. Like when contentment is really strong, our mind might still be entangled with sense experience, but it has so much of what it thinks it wants that the entanglement isn't actively stressful. It's sort of in abeyance, there in the background, but not active. So it's still a dependent relationship with experience, but we're feeling what it's like not to be so tight, so restless. So we need to break into our small groups soon. I just want to mention that for those of you who are coming to the space, we need a couple more program hosts. Kevin has volunteered. Jen is going to be able to cover one night. I have a little slip to remind you, Kevin, what nights. I give you 3 nights. So let me know. You can come up afterward if you're interested in doing that. I want to thank Dave Braun, who's going to help every other week with the online small groups. In a moment, I'll turn it, the people online, over to Dave. But I just want to remind folks that when you get, and I'll divide the people up in the room here in a moment, but when you show up in your small group, most of you will be in groups of 3. There may be a few with 4. Sit close if you're in person. Turn your camera on if you're willing, if you're online. And just go around and say your name. You can say where you're from. And it's nice to share your pronouns, because more and more we can misgender people without knowing. We just make these presumptions based on how we've been conditioned, and that may not be the preferred pronouns of that person. So it's just nice to let people know, he, him, she, her, they, them, or whatever, how you want to be referred, because the last 5 or 7 minutes is just going to be open discussion. But before that, each person gets about 3 minutes. It may be best to have somebody do some timing and just acknowledge when 3 minutes has passed. And really give that person 3 minutes. And I know it can be a little awkward if that person doesn't have anything more to say. But you know what? We know how to sit together. So just let there be some silence. The person whose turn it is to speak, you can keep reflecting in your own mind and heart. You might have more to say as you just think about this question, which is those places in life where we felt some responsibility for our suffering. Like, I'm pretty sure what my mind is doing, how my mind is understanding, is behind the suffering that I'm experiencing. I may not know how to unhook, but I may still have the instinct to want to blame out there, but I think the cause for the suffering is close at hand. It's some way the mind is relating, understanding, seeing right now. Because that kind of curiosity really, that sense of responsibility turns. So it's sharing a space in your life where you feel like that's happening, or share a place in your life where you're pretty sure it has nothing to do with you, and it's the world's fault, or God's fault, or this person's fault, or some external, and just kind of sense that helplessness. Like if that's true, then you're a victim. And then is that helpful to have that point of view? And just unpack that in the group if you feel comfortable. Of course, it's always okay to pass, and what happens in the group stays in the group. There's a code of confidentiality. If you were to share it, then you wouldn't refer it back to the person. It's just like, just to kind of protect people's privacy. Great, I think that's enough. Really great being here. Take a look at some of the study materials this week. There's a lot there. You're not expected to read it all. I'll make some recommendations usually, but you can just follow your nose in terms of what articles stand out for you.